In the last episode, Arthur was forced to choose between the life he desired and the life demanded of him, embarking on a journey that exposed him to suffering, cruelty, and the darker truths of existence. That awakening marked the end of illusion and the beginning of a philosophy forged by horror rather than hope.
So our story really kicks off with a young Arthur Schopenhauer, and he is absolutely trapped. See, he made this promise to his father, but it wasn't just a simple promise. It was more like a pact, and it felt like a life sentence, chaining him to a future he wanted no part of.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures how he felt. He saw himself as this valuable vase, a mind built for philosophy, for art, for big ideas. But this pact with his dad, it shoved him into the world of commerce, essentially taking that beautiful vase and using it as a plain old kitchen pot. I mean, what a powerful way to describe feeling like your potential is just being completely wasted.
Feeling completely stuck, Arthur started living this strange double life. By day, he'd go through the motions as a merchant's apprentice, but by night, he was secretly devouring the great thinkers, reading all the books he could get his hands on. And you'd think this would be a relief, right? But it wasn't. It was pure torment. Every moment he spent studying just filled him with this crushing guilt, like he was betraying his father with every single page he turned.
And that pressure from his father, it was relentless. It wasn't just in his head. It was this constant barrage of criticism. His dad would send him these letters, picking apart every little thing, even his handwriting. He actually called his capital letters veritable monstrosities. Can you imagine? There was just no escaping this feeling that he was always falling short.
Yeah, it didn't stop with his handwriting. It went all the way to how he carried himself, his posture. Think about getting a letter from your dad that says, if you slouch, people will think you're a disguised tailor or cobbler. This wasn't just fatherly advice. This was, well, it was psychological oppression, a constant nagging reminder of this rigid world that he just couldn't seem to fit into.
And then, only 9 months into his apprenticeship, something happened. Something that would absolutely shatter Arthur's world. A terrible tragedy that would, weirdly enough, unlock the door to his cage. On that day, his father, Heinrich, went to his warehouse, climbed to the top, and took his own life. It was a shocking, brutal end to the man whose expectations had so completely suffocated Arthur's entire existence.
For Arthur, the emotional fallout was, well, it was complicated, to say the least. Was he just devastated by the loss? Or did some small, secret part of him feel a flicker of relief at this sudden, violent freedom?
His reaction was a total storm of conflicting emotions. Of course, he felt intense grief for the father he'd lost, but then there was this deep remorse for all the resentment he'd been holding onto. And maybe deepest of all, he felt this profound guilt over what he later called the wonderful possibility of liberation, this terrible sudden opportunity to finally walk the path his father had always blocked. But here's the thing, even with his father gone, that promise still haunted him. Arthur's sense of duty was just that strong. He felt like breaking his pledge now would be the ultimate betrayal. So even though he was miserable, he decided to stay. He chose to remain chained by his word.
So while Arthur was completely paralyzed by duty, his mother, Johanna, was the exact opposite, and she would become the very person to finally set him free.
I mean, the contrast between them is just night and day. Arthur, immobilized, stuck, bound by duty. Johanna, she described herself as too fast, too resolute. She didn't just sit around. After her husband's death, she didn't take the safe route. She chose what she called the most exciting option available to her.
And what a life she built. She didn't just grieve, she acted. She sold the family mansion, liquidated the entire business, and moved to Weimar, which was basically the cultural center of Germany. There, she started this famous literary salon. She became friends with the great Goethe, and she became a famous novelist in her own right, one of the first women in Germany to actually make a living as a writer. She was a truly liberated woman.
2 years passed, and seeing her son still stuck in that same misery, Johanna sent him a letter that changed everything. In it, she gave him the one thing his father never, ever could: permission. She wrote, "I know what it means to live a life repugnant to one's soul, and if it is possible, I will spare you. Do not cheat on yourself." Just an incredible, incredible gift of freedom.
For Arthur, who'd been wrestling with this for years, those words were like a dam breaking. He later wrote that after he finished reading the letter, he just shed a flood of tears. You can just feel the release in that, right? The end of this long, silent internal war.
His decision was instant, which for a guy who is usually so indecisive is really saying something. He wrote back immediately. He accepted her offer. He chose liberation. And just like that, the path to philosophy, to his true calling, was finally open. The chains were well and truly broken.
So with this newfound freedom, Schopenhauer could finally start to develop the philosophical mindset that would define his entire life's work. This ability to see life not as something you're trapped in, but as a grand passing show that you get to observe.
This quote right here is the key to everything. Schopenhauer's big idea was that we all live two lives at once. There's our life in the concrete, where we're all caught up in the drama of day-to-day events. But then there's this second life in the abstract where we can step back and become a mere spectator and observer. His liberation is what allowed him to really live in that second life.
He called this perspective the passing show. Think of it like this. You're on a train, and life is the landscape flowing past the window. Your successes, your failures, your desires, it's all just part of the scenery. The goal isn't to jump out and try to control the landscape, but to simply watch it glide by without letting it pull you out of your seat.
And, this idea of detached observation pops up in a lot of places. Take the Hindu deity Ganesha, for example. His image is basically a set of instructions for this exact mindset. The axe is to cut off attachments. The little mouse at his feet represents keeping your desires under your control. Every part of him is a guide to becoming that calm observer of the passing show.
So whether you're talking about Schopenhauer's observer or the wisdom of Ganesha, the core principle is exactly the same. Peace is an inside job. The passing show of what's happening on the outside can't actually disturb your inner calm, your equanimity. Only you can do that, by how you react and what you get attached to.
When you look back at it, Schopenhauer's cage wasn't unlocked by some heroic act of his own courage. It was shattered by tragedy, by forces totally outside of his control. And his story really reminds us that sometimes freedom is born not from courage, but from loss. And the path to oneself begins only when duty collapses under its own weight.
Follow us for more episodes.